Hey player, what's going on? DM of Unleashed here. I know you wanted to get in your game, and time's been short, so I figured I'd toss you some information. And they said the way I figured this is get you a little bit better acclimated for your session and everything like that. Like I realize with Unleashed at least there's a certain learning curve there that there's a lot of stuff to remember for your character. There's a lot of little powers, abilities, everything like that. It's easy to forget some stuff, especially if you haven't had a chance to play it very much. With that being said, I was going to cover a couple things, mainly a couple powers you have that go along with your speed. Um, that's just like I said. If you want, you're obviously, of course, welcome to say whatever you want to other players. But I just wanted to make sure that you were aware where you were, because I know like there was a little bit of misunderstanding with the speed. But yeah, so there was a couple things with your powers. The one thing I did actually want to talk about was the Anvari's ability to blend in, because there is something to that that's beyond like just them kind of looking the same. And then the other thing was I wanted to make sure I made a clarification with the Speed Force thing, because it's one thing like to have like the DM and the player not be on quite the same page, but I just want to make sure we were around that point. So first things first with the powers and the speed and everything like that. Yeah, like we talked about earlier a little bit. Like Tor can actually hit, I think 187 is his about like top speed that he can push it to. He might be able to push 200 for a brief sprint. It's one of those ones like it's very brief. Like it's really hard. Like that's the one that's the point where you're like kind of falling over yourself. So usually around like 160 to 187 is kind of his like cruise run speed, where he can keep that up, but it's still a pretty intense run. Like I guess for him, more of a jog would be around like or probably from like 80 to 140, somewhere in that range. Which yeah, is pretty fast as far as a character goes. Now, that speed is very much like linear. Like it's not. He's not darting in and out of things or anything like that. Like that's taking long strides to run. So it's like it's very easy to do in a straight line. It's very difficult, if not impossible, for him to maintain that speed if he's cutting around corners, and he's certainly not like darting down alleyways with like that. Now he's still fast, but gives you a little bit better perspective of where his speed is. A couple things that you have that like I said, I know you are the stealth character and everything like that, but you have a couple interesting little tips or tricks and tools that you might not be readily familiar with. The one is something called Spectrum Armor. You're actually really proficient with that, and what that does is it allows you to you can use it in stealth or out of stealth. Out of stealth, it's less straining. In stealth, it's just something extra to protect yourself with. It's kind of there for if you do get caught and you do need to box a little bit. Like you're not just like some regular squishy dude. The way Spectrum Armor works is depending on the stealth trees you associate with at that time. Like physical is like kinetic attacks, like punches, kicks, maybe even like some stabs and some blades and slashes. And like psychic stealth obviously is like protects you from psychic based attacks. One of the other ones, like I forget all this, I have to look up the spectrums of stealth, but yeah, like each spectrum of stealth protects you from something different. So like the more spectrums you're attuned to, the more protected you are. Now that's armor, so that means like it's reducing the damage. The second thing you have is something called Spectrum Shield. Now Spectrum Shield is a finite amount of damage absorption, which means that until it breaks, you're not going to be feeling the damage from it. So it's like armor is like the one where it can protect you, and it can be like if the attack is weak enough, it might not cause any damage, but if it's strong enough, it might hurt some, but not as much as it would otherwise. Whereas Spectrum Shield is just like 100% absorption until it breaks. So you might be able to take a punch, maybe. Depends on the guy throwing the punch, I guess. But yeah, that's something you as a player can kind of keep in mind as far as your stealth stuff goes. Now, that doesn't mean you want to go out there and save the world or anything like that, because you might be able to throw up a little bubble around you. That's not going to save you from some hulking dude that's going to want to punch you to the moon or something like that. Yeah. So the other thing uh, that I was going to mention was the way Andvari work, and I think I've sort of mentioned this before, but like this, there's something definitely more I want to touch on, and that is specifically the way they tend to blend in with one another. So, as you probably remember or may remember, is like the Andvari can change basically anything about themselves, especially if it's advantageous to fit their situation. So, they can do it on a environmental level, like where if you're in an area there's a lot of water, not a lot of land, you can grow yourself some gills and webbed fingers or fins or something like that, and you could become an aquatic creature from that point out, or they can adapt to more social type settings. So the big thing with Andvari males and females is, one, they are very androgynous, like they don't have the wide hips or the big boobs or anything like that. Like they don't have like the male, like with the broader shoulders, like what humans do. Like their species is doesn't have any sexual dimorphism. Like they're pretty much, they look exactly the same. Now you guys can kind of tell the men from the women, but like other species is just because you guys look so similar, uh, it doesn't quite work like that. Yeah, the other thing that's kind of like a thing within your communities. It's not done often, but it's something that people can do. Is Andvari can change their sex, so it's there's a bit of a stigma that goes along with that, but yeah, it's like there's always kind of a bit of a caution and everything with that. Like for people who are worried about that kind of thing. Some people don't care. Some people do. It's it depends on the person, depends on the NPC, depends on the character. But yeah, like it's pretty much a leftover like biological thing where like from the old tribal days where let's say there was a war and all your women warriors are wiped out or your men warriors are wiped out and you like you're left with no way to carry on your line. Well, someone in that tribe would probably change themselves and they'd be able to reproduce from there. So it's a very like fluid kind of thing with that. But yeah, like I said, it's not something that's very common now. Like most people are pretty happy with where they are. The other thing they'll do on a social level is like like for people who want to be famous and stuff like that, it's hard for an Andvari to become famous for the way they are, just because they're not very standoutish. But like Andvari who want to attract attention, like let's say there was an Andvari who wanted to be an exotic dancer, like they can give themselves a bigger chest and wider hips and like more like distinct features like that. But it's like then you just kind of end up looking more human than you do Andvari, and it's like you probably just wouldn't know the difference anyway. You'd be thinking that's just another human out there, of which there aren't many, like there are many Andvaris. But their ability to blend into crowds is, on the one hand, like you think about how like Asian cultures are, because Asians don't have anywhere near the genetic diversity that we have like over here in North America. So it's like Asians tend to all be around the same height. Andvari are like that too. Like most Andvari tend to be pretty like within like 5 or 6 inches of each other as far as height goes. There's not a lot of discrepancy. Like you don't see a lot of tall ones, you don't see a lot of short ones. They're all in that meaty bell curve. And the same way like with their facial features, like they all tend to have very similar features. Like whereas like Americans, whether you're Irish or Polish or like any of the different Caucasian races, or like if you have like any kind of like Spanish or like South American, Mexican kind of blend, African American, anything like that. Like there's a lot of different features for like Americans that kind of set their features apart, whereas Asians are a little less distinct. So kind of think of it like that. But beyond that, like it seems like that there's I don't want to say mystical level to it, but like there's an extra factor that it's something Tor would have noticed, where I guess like his best speculation would be is like how now he wouldn't necessarily know what zebras are, but like Sean obviously does. But like there's something where the way Andvari look as a crowd, something about them causes them to blend in with each other better, and it might be something on almost a mystical level to things. No one's really looked into it or anything like that. The best guess is probably somewhere in their history It was a survival mechanism that let them push forward. Envari have never been hunters; they've always been vegetarians. That's something, like I said, I think you can change in game. You might have a stomach ache or something like that. You start eating meat, but like Envari, like have always been herbivores. Like they were never hunters there or anything like that. So, like them being now, that's not to say an Avari has never eaten meat. Like, there might be some environments where they would do that, but like traditionally speaking, most of the time, we'll say a good 90 to 95% have been vegetarian. um, yeah, I don't know how we got into the vegetarian topic, but you know how these kind of things go. Uh, but yeah, like I said, there's definitely some sort of effect that you guys have whenever you're in crowds that allows you to blend in with another. It's almost like there's something that like kind of makes you really hard to pick out, especially when you're around other Ampharis. And you've used this to your advantage before, so like it's a thing as far as your character's background and things like that. So like if someone's looking for you exactly, it's probably pretty hard for them to find you. That's without your stealth powers. Like as long as you're in a crowd and stuff like that, people have a really hard time picking not just you out, but like any Andvari out. Like you've watched people like an Andvari pickpocket or something like that, and someone catches him and he runs in the crowd. And, like you can kind of follow him. Andvari can kind of spot each other, but other species have a hard time doing. The final thing, and like I said, this is something like the DM is kind of hesitating on, but also just wants to make sure like things are clear, because I don't want you to feel like, oh man, I gave this up this opportunity or anything like that. With the speed force and everything, the big reason why the DM came to you and wanted to make sure that you knew, or you kind of kept in mind, was that the stories aren't planned out. Like you don't have to follow any arc or anything like that. Like you don't want to take part in it, that's fine. Was that probably it was more the vessel believed that you liked your character and you put a lot of thought and effort into his powers and how you wanted him to be. But this would have fundamentally changed your character. Like you would have probably still kept some of your abilities, but like they would have been fundamentally changed. And so it's like it's not like you passed up power. You passed up what you technically passed up was a side grade. So you'd have went like at Tor's current power level, only his powers would have focused more on speed than stealth. So it's like it doesn't feel like you gave up like this amazing opportunity or anything like that. It's like, no, you would have still been Tor, you would have been faster, which like as we go with real world, you can certainly argue that being faster is more powerful in real world because speed is everything. Until someone's faster than you, then speed's not as important. But yeah, you kind of get the sentiment. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of put that out for you because, on my end, I was thinking like it's very possible the DM didn't convey well, with the NPCs well enough to say what was going on. And like I said, I know like there's always funny things and people like players will misinterpret and everything like that. But I feel like this is kind of a big enough thing where I don't want you to and like I said, you're certainly welcome to say, oh, I passed up this power, now I'm screwed over. Like, yeah, I'm not saying you have to change your narrative. You can say whatever you want to the other players, but kind of like as an interaction between you and the DM, he just wants to make sure that you know where you stood. Like, it's not like you passed up this great power, you passed up a side grade. And the reason you were kind of given that extra warning is because, you had a character that you built that you liked, and I didn't want you to feel like the DM kind of stuck you with something where you changed your character on a fundamental level and everything that you liked about him was no longer there. But yeah, that was the big thing. Like I said, I know you've been trying to give some time for your game and time's been short and everything like that, so I figured I'd toss some information out for you, something to think about, something to ruminate on a little bit. If you find the time or anything like that, feel free to hit the DM up. If not, hey, guess what? I'm fine with that DM it. Hopefully we'll see what happens this Saturday here. I'm planning on trying to be around. Hopefully you stay healthy and everything like that. Alright, catch you later, man.